today's topic is an interesting news article that I found, and the title of it is from NBC News. Minneapolis scraps plans to pay influencers to fight misinformation during officers' trials. Note that this does not end in a question mark.
Right.
This is a legitimate news article.
And it's not just any trial.
Yep. Okay, so this is I'll read the subheadline. Under the program, the city would have paid 6 social media influencers $2,000 each to share messages during the trials of the former police officers charged in the killing of George Floyd.
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
Perhaps the biggest high-profile trial of maybe the decade.
Yeah, maybe. It's huge. There was quite a bit of backlash to the city-approved messages. The stated goal by the city was to combat misinformation during the upcoming trials of the 4 police officers charged in the killing of George Floyd. So apparently the city was criticized on social media and residents and community groups when this all came down. So I think the topic here is really to form an opinion on if this is something that is going to be more common, which I think it is, and if it's something that is already being done broadly, which I think it is, and where we head as a society when this is essentially an acknowledgement that even governments or cities or whatnot are using social media to influence outcomes. The defense here would be, well, we're not trying to influence the outcome. We're just trying to put out correct information. And that is the core of the defense here, is that we're putting out correct information or good information.
Is social media special? What if I just pay the local newspaper to print a Wikipedia page? Here's some facts, just a different medium. It feels icky, though. I'm not going to lie.
It does feel icky. It feels extremely icky. But
I'm having a hard time not saying this is okay, because really it depends on the content of those messages. You're paying an influencer. You're paying. Another take on this is we're going to compensate community engagers for their time in getting out important information in a city that had some riots around this issue, and maybe we want to make sure the facts are all correctly disseminated.
So here's what they say. It's a quote. In our experience, we have heard repeatedly that many residents are not connected to the city's traditional routes of sharing information, and we often hear from residents that they were not informed of significant information or resources that are available. So with this, we are constantly seeking out ways to make sure that all of our residents are informed of timely and accurate information in ways that are meaningful to them. So it's a decent argument, right? That
I agree.
We recognize as a city that the people that live here are not connected to traditional media, so they're not getting the information that might be pertinent.
Well, I would say may or may not be. It's a diverse group of people, but yeah.
Exactly, may or may not be pertinent.
Engage on all levels.
So I think the first ick factor for me comes when you say social media influencer. It just puts a bad taste in my mouth because...
Yeah, that word influencer.
Yeah, and also just social media, because what is social media and influencing more frequently about? It's more frequently about selling lifestyles and
self-promotion,
quite often misinformation or ideology. So I think that initial ick factor comes from that. So I'm going to try my best to put that aside and say, let's forget about the idea of the ick factor on social media influencer and ask the question, is this something that makes sense? And the way they explain it to help the residents who aren't connected to traditional media get the information they might need. But the first question I would have is, how do we measure that? And are you ever going to reach the people in a meaningful way to consume the information you want them to consume? Because really what you're saying is people need to be better informed. And with that, I agree. They need to be better informed. Will this, in fact, better inform them, or might it confuse them further? And then secondarily, what is the intent of the group that publishes this information? Do they have a bias in one way or another? And that's where I think the key problem comes in with any regulatory or in control of information group. What are they seeking to put out there? So it starts at the origin of the information.
For sure.
Is it bipartisan? Is it non-opinionated? If we just say, yes, it is, then we go to the secondary problem. Is it effective at reaching its target audience? Not changing opinions, but informing opinions so that they can make better choices. We know social media can influence people, broadly speaking, but does it influence critical thought or actual potential changes of opinion or of the evolutions of opinion? Or is it more for making the people who already have an ideology or opinion just be louder?
Interesting. I mean, well, I'm less interested in that part of it. Like, you kind of brought up the 2 points, one being the sort of ethics of it, and then secondly, the effectiveness of it, or, the non-bias in the first category. The effectiveness, I'm not as concerned about because you got to try and experiment a little bit. Even though $2,000 is a lot of money, I'll take it if somebody wants to write me a check. It's not such a this might not be a huge part of the budget. This might be within the R&D area where it's like, you know what? We should try and engage on random levels. We should be allowed to fail sometimes and experiment and see what works. So in that regard, you can always measure later. The channels they try, unless you're worried about how the city wasting money, that doesn't bother me that much. It's more what's the content of the message.
Yeah, I think that's probably the bigger concern is how is it phrased. I would have actually liked to seen this happen, like you said.
Yeah.
We've got $2,000. It's an experiment. I'm a big fan of running experiments and collecting data. I would have liked to see this happen so that we could see that data, assuming they collect it, which I doubt they do. I'm skeptical. And then the secondary is so that I could see what the messages were.
Is the compensation problematic for you?
Well, again, it goes back to the content being pushed out there. Are they pushing out a one-sided view intentionally, or are they pushing out just facts? Are they just saying, here is the facts of what happened. Here is legitimately what's happening. Don't draw conclusions yet. The messaging is stay calm. Wait for the trial to be over. Here's the information we currently have that's factual. Obviously, we've all seen the video. They were pretty much, it's damning, right? So we can all agree that there's going to be some outcome for them that includes jail time, probably. But even in saying that, like I've talked to all my cop friends, that was pretty clear an abuse of power. So establishing that, what I know, it still hasn't gone through the trial.
Right.
So I have to step back from that and say the city has no responsibility in designing an outcome. So what information are they putting out there?
I think it could be ancillary to the trial. This is obviously going to be an event of international interest, and it's not outside the realm of possibility that rioting could occur, and the city should do something to mitigate that.
Right, and that's what they say in here, quote, "This was never about trying to persuade or change public opinion about any particular message, but it was about getting important information out quickly and in an equitable way."
But going back to the money, if we go to that city, the governor's got to have some sort of press briefing room. If you get a press credential, you can go in there, get your briefing, and then go publish your stuff. They don't give you a $2,000 check on the way out. Do you see this as being sort of a weirdly different situation in that regard?
Well, you just cited why it is different. You're right. I never thought of it in that respect. So these influencers, there were 6 of them. They were going to pay them $2,000 each to send out messages. Them being paid is interesting because are they being paid just to make sure they put out exactly the message that the city tells them? Or are they allowed to put a spin on it?
Good question.
Are they allowed to be like a reporter and report? Allowed to sit in those briefing rooms and adjust their influence message? Are they allowed to guide an opinion in their minds and publish it slightly different? Or is everybody going to publish the same message?
Do you have a problem with that?
This is a tough one.
Let's assume it's also annotated. This is a paid message from the city or from the, whatever the officiating body is. And then a follow-up post is me saying all the things I like and don't like about it.
I don't really have a problem with that per se at first glance. We need more people to access this information. They're going to go to the influencers. They're going to say, look, I was paid for this, but I think it's important. Or even them just saying, this is an important message without changing it at all, without opinion in that message from the city. and all of the influencers publish it
Mm-hmm.
with the same content. I don't really have a problem with that because it's like the city publishing something in a paper to say this is the state of things or whatnot. The problem is that there's many news sources and they're all covering the same thing, and you can go and see the diversity of opinion, right? Whereas with an influencer that you're paying, you're seeing direct messages from the city. It's more akin to the city publishing a one-page paper ad or an article in the paper, every day saying, here's the state of things, here's the state of things, here's the state of things over and over. So I think it's kind of the reverse of the press, isn't it, in that sense?
That it's a paid placement, yeah.
If it is a paid placement, then I think it does all go back to the messaging, the truthfulness, whether or not it's laced with any form of opinion.
Yeah.
Because now the city's choosing where to spend their money and where to push out information when that traditionally is the job of the free press.
Oh, you think so? I mean, I know the free press would like to claim that, but when they don't deliver, is the government supposed to step in and help?
Yeah, I think that's the question that's evolving in this discussion is, should the government be in the business of, paying people to put out information?
Well, in some sense, it certainly has to, just because of the very existence of misinformation. The fact that our capital can be stormed around misinformation means that, a small investment may have saved lives.
But they do. So here's the thing, they do. The sheriff in LA County has a Twitter feed. You want to subscribe to that. You can get factual, up-to-date information about what's going on with the sheriffs all the time.
But the sheriff's not an influencer.
He's not. That is information that's out there and available. I guess the argument is it goes back to it's not reaching the right people.
So you're saying during the hiring process, we need to consider the sheriff's social media better.
I'm not saying that, but that's interesting.
I didn't think so, no.
Let's hire people who have influence over people and let them tweet things out at the behest of the corporation.
Hey, we're both near Hollywood. We know how it goes.
This is a sci-fi future that is near term, I suspect.
Well, getting to the nearer term, though, I have kind of wound myself into a position where I think this has been overblown, that I wouldn't call it a misstep by the city. It might have been an experiment that they chose never to repeat, or one that was very effective.
Yeah, I
Who
think
knows?
to some degree, if they did it right, and I think their intent was likely a good one, because if they did it right, they might be able to send out messages really quick saying, look, the trial's not over. Don't panic. Because that the media is going to sensationalize it, right? There will be the story that they're going to get off,
Right.
and they're not going to get convicted before there's any before the trial's over, and then there's going to be the other side saying they're going to go down hard.
Sure.
And I think if the city wanted to combat that so that there wasn't a riot, I can see that being a laudable thing, but then the critic in me comes back to all the questions we asked is, what kind of can of worms does this open up? Who's in charge of that messaging?
Well, yeah, it's
Right.
going to have to be a city employee, ultimately.
It'll have to be one person or many people. And how quickly can you really cycle through that information and have it be unbiased? If it has to come down to one person going, okay, what's the message for this hour?
Oh, honestly, I don't think that's that hard if you're genuine in your non-biasedness. I mean, I've written stuff and had people accuse me of, being at either end of the spectrum based on the same exact blog post, which I think is good. It just means it's an exploration of the facts on both sides. If trained to do that, I'm not saying I'm good at it, but someone who spends their profession doing that, disseminating just the raw facts, I think is pretty easy to do. Because the court's procedural. I mean, it's not like, anybody in America who isn't a lawyer gets it because the TV doesn't describe it correctly, but it's step by step. There's a process that you need an expert to lay out, and that needs to be summarized, and it's just factual. It's mechanical.
Yeah, I think that you have more faith in people than I do, I suppose, in terms of wanting to put a spin on it or make it exciting. If we're just putting factual stuff out, as long as the influencers can't put their spin on it or reinterpret it, I'm mostly cool with it, assuming the good faith of the city officials that are publishing the information and it's more fact-based than opinion based.
But why does that bother you? What if I'm one of the influencers and I put up the city's post and it says this is sponsored content, and then I say, hey, everybody, did you see that BS I just posted? I got $2,000 for doing that, and here are my actual thoughts on it. Is that okay?
From a free speech perspective, yeah, that's okay. This is the conundrum, right? We're in a world where tweets can cause unrest and can cause misinformation and also just generally foment, for better or worse, sometimes worse, sometimes actually better, can foment information spreading. And so that person saying, hey, the BS I just posted, they have a right to do that. But this is the can of worms it opens. Now it appears that the city is in connection with this influencer. They paid them to do something, and how confusing it gets when you start to see those things happen where the influencer directly contradicts what it is that they were asked to post.
Well, let's test the boundaries here. Let's forget about the trial for a moment. Let's imagine the city did this to disseminate information about vaccine schedules and availability.
It's pretty easily factual. I have no problem with the factual, but this goes back to then what if the person says, hey, I got paid to post that BS, but I ain't getting that vaccine.
Well, then you picked the wrong influencer, that's for sure.
Yes, you did.
Somebody's going to lose their job at the city.
Well, he won't be influencing much after that. Well, for the city at the very least.
Right. Yeah, that'll be a one-time gig.
So, there's some economic pressure to, support the message that they're asking them to put out, etc. I think it's a very little likelihood. I haven't seen the influencers because they don't publish the list of influencers. And,
right.
Do they have any prevailing opinions, or did they pick people who are mostly just respected and well thought out? We don't know.
All right, so you're okay with paying the influencers to get the word out about vaccines. What about paying the influencers to promote anti-gambling, anti-addiction agendas? Educate people about statistics, and they shouldn't waste their money on gambling, and also drugs are bad.
Yeah, I see where you're going with it. Like, where do we draw the line on the messaging? The court case is different because the trial isn't over. So having an opinion is not really that fair.
Oh, it is for only 12 people.
The jury. In the case of a trial or something where there's not enough data, we have incomplete information, we have to be careful about how we spend that money through influencers. And I think that that's a fair statement. Whereas I think the drugs or vaccine, the data is clear on drugs, vaccines. Kids doing drugs is most decidedly a bad thing.
Doing recreational drugs, just to be clear.
Yeah. And that's probably, this would have never gone noticed if it wasn't for this trial, if it wasn't about this trial. If they had done this
first time
to spread what you said.
No way.
Well, that brings us to the other topic. There's no way this is the first time in the history of America that this has been done. This must be being done all the time right now. So is that what you think, that it's done frequently and we just haven't heard about it yet?
I hadn't thought of it before this, but yeah. I actually think it might be less innocuous than you think. That's why the money was kind of something on my mind. I mean, I'm in a very small time way involved with community stuff here in LA through our block club and, kind of stuff like that. There are this kind of network. There's a network to it. There are certain people who are community builders, and I get an email from our block club leader twice a day because she's connected to all these board president type people, and they're sharing what is too much information for me, quite frankly. But someone like that, if you got to get the word out to people, you go right to Diane, and she's going to get it to me and everybody else. So the city has relationships with people like that. Why wouldn't they use their social network? I don't think it's as evil as it could be painted here.
And I agree with you on that. And I think the money makes it sticky.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
Like we said in the beginning, throwing out the icky factor of social media influencers and your general visceral instinct about what that means, I think is part of the problem.
You have to.
So
it's not up to me to judge what's good media. You can get your news from Playboy if you want. That's not my call.
Wait a minute. Isn't that good media? The articles. Everybody reads it for the articles, right?
The subscription you gifted me ran out and you didn't renew, so
For the record, I did not. All right. So I think we can put a bookend in this one and say it's worth a follow-up if we see more information on it, because I'd like to know
Yeah.
if this is a common thing or if this is the first instance. And
Yeah.
if anybody knows, post a link in the comments, and perhaps we'll find someone who would know more about this topic. And I'm not even sure where to look, though. That's the thing.
Well, the one thing I hope, maybe this will lead us to who to talk to about it, is my hope is that whomever is the ultimate decision maker on what goes out in that release should be an elected official. So if the constituency doesn't like the tone of the messaging, they can swap that person out.
It's a good point. It's a good control factor in a sense for keeping the
Yeah.
messaging on point. Now, my contradiction to that would be if the city is overwhelmingly or 70% of one demographic, like purely Democrat or purely Republican, then the message could very, very quickly become something that supports the constituents and only the constituents that are going to virtually guarantee a vote.
True, but in that regard, I don't know that I have the answers, but it's nothing new. That's social media didn't change that aspect of it. Politicians have had, interesting relationships with their press offices for a while, I assume.